we have Teri Lawler, who is the Education Associate for Trauma-Informed Practices and Social and Emotional Learning at the Delaware Department of Education. We are so glad she's here to share her knowledge with us today. Teri has brought, and Teri and Kim have prepared a PowerPoint, which we are providing for you, a couple per table. Everybody will also receive this in an email after the conference. So no worries if you are hoping to get a copy today. I know that Teri and Kim have a wonderful session plan. You guys will be getting up, you'll be doing some movement, and we're going to have a lot of fun together. So I also am going to take this opportunity to introduce our other presenter for the next hour, Kim Graham, who, yes, round of applause for everybody, is currently the Trauma Academy Coordinator of the Delaware State University. However, Kim wears many hats. I'm sure many of you know her as a performer and educator and many other things around town as a consummate educator. So we are so thankful to have both of these women here today to lead us in our next session, and I'm going to turn it over to Teri.
Thank you all so much for having us. We are thrilled to be here. We have talked about this session for the longest and had no idea that we wouldn't have a PowerPoint and all the typical stuff, because we've been on Zoom for the last 2 years, right? So you have to forgive us. We'll make sure that you get the slides, but it's giving us a chance to sort of stretch our brains a little bit. Yep, come outside of our boxes, those little Zoom boxes even, and reconnect with people and the hearts of people. Because when I think about trauma and how it impacts young people, when we are doing our work in the department, what we talk about often is that we want to provide professional learning that connects the mind and the heart. So people's hands move with compassionate action. We want to leave this session knowing something that we can do differently, a different way to engage with people, a different way to move through the world so that we have healing-centered opportunities to interact with others. Every interaction is an intervention, if you think about it, and we want to approach the work that way. So in 2018, Governor Carney signed Executive Order 24 to make Delaware a trauma-informed state. However, by doing that, it didn't necessarily happen overnight. We knew there was lots of things that needed to take place, and we didn't have a blueprint for how to make that happen. We had lots of words on papers. So at the Department of Ed, we took the developmental framework for trauma-informed practices that the state put out, and we used that to, one, create a roadmap for our schools and our districts, but also to guide and monitor the progress that takes place every year. So on one of the slides, you're gonna see a heat map, and that heat map shows by color code how informed we are in different environments. If you look at the center of the state, we've got a lot of work to do there. That's the gray area. But lots of work is taking place, and in that space, what we're gonna share today are some of the strategies that we use to support our schools, our community-based organizations, anyone who interacts with young people in developing the skills necessary so that we can support growth, post-traumatic growth, and ultimately thriving. In order to thrive, you need a certain level of energy and vitality to go along with your learning. And that can take place at any age and lifespan. And so for that reason, we have activities that will go along with what we're going to talk about so that we can get some vitality going along with the words that we're talking about.
So, hello everybody. So we're gonna just take a few moments because you've been sitting for a while, right? And so it's amazing how much we have to catch up with in terms of how we do what we do, because we know that sitting is not the best way to learn, but we're all stuck in it. I do it, we all do it. But this is gonna be our moment to have our first activity, and it is based on movements by Anne Green Gilbert, and it's called Brain Dance. So today we're just gonna do some movements to get some blood flowing. But if you YouTube brain dance, you're gonna see video clips that come up that if you work with youth, if you are a teacher or educator and you say, I'm not a dancer, you can put the video on and you can do the movement along with your students or that you're working with. So if you are willing and able, if you could stand up, you can just put your chairs under your seat. You can either stand in the space right behind your chair or in the little aisle space. And I know we're recording. And Jonathan, you don't have a standing mic, do you? Okay. Yeah, this is not gonna. Can you guys still hear? Maybe if I put it right in front of me. Okay. So in brain dance, there's about 8 specific activities that you do. The first is to breathe. So just let your hands hang down by your side and take a nice deep breath in and out. Now, most of us did something that is a very helpful thing. When you're trying to use breath to help someone to calm down, you want the amount of time that they breathe out to be shorter than they breathe in. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as 7-11 breathing. I've also heard people do 2-4 breathing. But it actually stimulates you. But taking that shorter breath in and then exhaling longer, it already begins to calm that polyvagal nerve. So we're going to take another breath in and out. Awesome. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to focus on our movements that are, we're going to do tactile, and that's our touch. So I just want you to touch your forehead, you're going to touch your arms, you're going to go down to your feet, and all the way back up. And when you get back up, instead of touching, you're just going to give yourself a little squeeze. Just squeeze. It's your body. And when working with children, this also just helps them to know you're okay. Everything you have is okay. All right? And just lastly, we're just going to brush. Just brush it all off. And if you're working with students, you can have music playing behind you, and you can connect this with brushing off negative energy, whatever you want to do. And so now you've gotten that that tactile. Now we're going to do core and distal. Distal is out as far as you can go, and core is how tight in you can go. So whichever way you can, just stretch your body out as far as you can stretch it, and then bring it all the way back in. You look like you needed that stretch. Let's take one more. She was like, don't make me move yet. Stretch it out, give yourself what you need, and bring it back in. And let's do it one more time, all the way out, and then bring it back in. Good. So we did breath, tactile, core, distal, and the next one that we are going to do is top, bottom. So now you're just going to move the top of your body, but keep those legs still. They're locked in place. So move them wherever you can. Hey, hey. So now you're going to hold the top of that body still, and you're just going to move your legs. If I could and I wouldn't fall, I'd do that new YouTube dance across the floor where they kick their feet. I can tell how many people have seen it, but you don't want to be picking me up. So you can feed. So that is now our top and our bottom. Now we're going to do left and right. So you're going to just move the right side of your body. Arms and legs. Just move them. You can either pivot, because that's still moving just one side of the body. And now you're going to switch to the other side of the body. Shake what your mama gave you. Shake what your mama gave you. And just give yourself some movement. Okay? And so now we are going to do cross lateral. cross-lateral, we're going to do head-tail. So you're going to move your head, and you're going to move your tail. And you can move them at the same time, but you want them to go different places while you're moving them. Okay? My 5-year-old niece has started to say booty butt, booty butt. I don't know where she got it from, but it's still funny. So we'll say booty head, booty head, booty head. Okay, awesome. So now we're going to do cross-lateral. There's something, and Teri can probably break it down for us even more. There's something that happens when we cross our midline, okay? It makes a very big difference. So whatever movement you do, you just want it to cross over from one side of your body to the other. Right to left, left to right, and do that cross. Awesome. And so lastly, if we had enough space, the last one is vestibular, and that means getting dizzy for free. And if we were in a big enough space, I'd have you spin around. But in the space that we're in, you can just spin your head around, spin it around, okay? And then bring it back center. Yes. So we did all of our standing in pretty much what one would call personal space. And so that's also important. When you're working with really young children and you're like, I can't do this with my classroom, they're gonna bump each other off. The first thing you can teach them is the difference between personal space and group space. And so in personal space, we are basically within the length that it takes for me to move around my body, okay? And then in the larger space, I can move around. So you might wanna start your younger children owning their space, right? And then as they become more comfortable, you can put on free dance movement and tell them to make up their own choreography, but they've got to use 3 of the movements, and so it can still become an active play while they are still getting that energy out, reviving their oxygen, and getting ready for their next task. Thank you.
All right. Wow. Look, wasn't that great? Look, I didn't plan on saying this, but Kim was one of the first people I met when I moved to Delaware for grad school. Met her at the University of Delaware campus. She's always been just like this, but she has such a calming effect on my nervous system. I love being around this, right? This is such good energy. So, Kim, you paved the way for us to have a conversation about trauma. So that was really good. So we'll do this a totally different way, because you brought up a couple different things. So we hear trauma talked about so much these days. And I want to begin just by asking you all, what do you know about trauma? What have you heard about trauma? And also I will begin by saying that when we have these conversations, sometimes we might bring up some feelings, bring up some experiences that could trigger a memory. If you ever are feeling unsafe, one thing I want to say is you're among friends. We're here. We're going to support each other. We're going to, be back to back and support each other. But if you need to get up and move around, you need to get out of the space, that's okay too. Do what's necessary to take care of yourself, but also know that we're here to help, okay? So anybody, just yell out something.
Trauma separates us from ourselves, each other, and our place in the world, and developmental trauma is the #1 health crisis in the world, and we ignore it.
Well, we can go home now.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Very well said.
That's right.
Could you hear her in the back? Okay. Trauma, would you like to say it yourself? There you go.
Thank you. Trauma separates us from ourselves, each other, and our place in the world. Developmental trauma is the #1 health crisis in the world, and we ignore it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. Now, we're working hard to change, in particular, the last one. We don't want to ignore it. There's so much that we can do to heal. And we want young people to not only heal, but go on to live those thriving lives. I think the first thing that we do in a prevention and wellness promotion way is focus on teaching that personal space that Kim talked about a minute ago, and that when that space has been violated, as quickly as you can, go let somebody know. Yell it from the rooftops, because typically what happens, we're traumatized in relationships often, and that healing is going to take place in relationships, but you've got to rebuild personal safety and feelings of empowerment by owning your space. And so as much as possible, we want to support people in owning their space. Kim also mentioned so many great things that will heal and support building connections, strengthen synapses in the brain. Okay, I'm a former school psychologist. I could talk about the brain all day long. The brain is a muscle, and we can work it. And for so many years, we thought brain development stopped at 18. But how many people, all it takes is one bad relationship to know that 18 is not where it ends, right? Our brains are developing for years after that, and the research suggests now way into our 20s, almost 30s, but there's some amazing research on stroke victims that tells us that we can rebuild, rewire the brain, and we do that through some of the very same movements that Kim talked about. When she had us going from left side to right side and going across the midline, you're strengthening your corpus callosum. It's a small sheath of skin that connects the left hemisphere with the right hemisphere. And in this work, yeah, there you go.
The corpus callosum would be right between here, connecting these two together.
Yeah. And in this work, one of the strategies, we use two major strategies when we do the trauma awareness trainings across the state. The first one is the brain architecture game. Have any of you played the brain architecture game? Okay, next year, we come back, we play the brain architecture game. But we're gonna do Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. And look, if you've done it before, do it along with us. But Dr. Dan Siegel says that the brain can be described as a fist. And the heel of the hand, the bottom of the hand, is where the brain stem is. There, things happen automatically. So it's the autonomic nervous system, our sleeping, our breathing, those basic structures. In the middle of the hand, where the thumb is, that area represents the limbic system. And our limbic system is where we build relationships and connection with other people. The thumb represents the amygdala, and when you are distressed, it gets wiggly, is what he says. And when that happens, it disconnects the top of the brain from the bottom of the brain. The top of the brain, where the fingers are curled over, represents the prefrontal cortex, and that's where thinking and reasoning takes place. So when the top is disconnected from the bottom, he calls that flipping your lid, okay?
And we've all flipped our lid a time or two.
And you never want two flip lids in communication with each other. So in schools, we say we don't want kids flipping their lids and adults flipping their lids at the same time. So we're not communicating well. But if you think about it, you don't want to flip your lid at home with other family members who are flipping their lids. Michelle Obama coined the phrase that when they go high, we go low. That's a good representation that when people are not in the top of their brains, you need to calm your voice, take it down a notch so that you give them a chance to breathe deeply and co-regulate with your calm, so that they can get back online, so to speak, in order to have a conversation. That may take a few minutes. That could take a few days. So you have to give people grace, space, and room to grow.
So just to build on, add just a piece, is when Teri talked about this lower brain, it's our fight, or freeze place. And so the amygdala is kind of like, was that, the top part of your brain was that dust or was that a mouse? And the bottom part of your brain is ready to roll. And the top part of your brain says it's a mouse, so you calm down. But this amygdala will take over the story, okay? And that amygdala starts going, and you're not hearing anything. Once that amygdala flips, you're not hearing anything. One of the things that was surprising for me to learn, Teri, is that when that happens, the amount of time it can take to get back to here. It's not instant.
That's right.
And you think of all the times that we are trying to get a child immediately back in order, or get them calm down, or stop this, or stop that, and they literally, physiologically and biologically cannot.
Yes. Well, and often we are using our words when they're not in a place where they can communicate. And so when we say calm down, even to an adult, when someone is reacting and you say calm down, what's the first thing that happens? I usually scream back, I am calm. You know, they don't even realize how it's an out-of-body experience. They don't even realize how out of character they are at that time.
Yeah.
So, good. All right. And so the other fact that was shared with us by Shay is that trauma is so prevalent in our society. First of all, this work is based on a study, the ACEs study that was done in the early 90s. It was actually based on a weight loss study, okay? 17,332 adults with health insurance, many college educated, but these are all folks, you know, fairly middle class, had participated in a study. They had had bariatric surgery, and they were trying to figure out why different people could not keep their weight off. And in the middle of doing a survey, focus groups, they found out that there were some core experiences that this group had had that was getting in the way of their weight loss success. And those core experiences became the original 10 questions of the ACEs questionnaire. And if you think about some of those things, they're very basic. Divorce, household dysfunction, to include physical, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, parent who is out of the home by way of incarceration, mental illness, moving frequently. Over the years, a number of even local cities, surrounding cities, Philadelphia and the Baltimore area included, have added in some additional metrics that they're using. Community violence, bullying, but all ways to determine, or at least give us an idea of how impacted individuals are by adverse experiences. We don't talk about this often, but living in poverty is an adverse childhood experience. And what the research says is that it is not just the experience, because many people grew up in poverty and had no idea that they were poor, okay? But it is the lack of relationships and access to resources that compounds the experience of poverty for people. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that there are, that we have access to basic needs and basic, what I would consider, you know, access to human rights experiences for young people so that they are not disconnected in their schools.
I just wanted to throw in there that when you think back to what we just talked about, the hand model of the brain, and you say, well, what does all this have to do with play? A lot of times when if a child has experienced trauma, it's gonna come out in their play. And we often address what we just saw, you know, why did you hit Johnny, or don't push so-and-so, without necessarily being aware is what fight, flight, or freeze trigger just occurred in that child, or what is this behavior helping me to understand or learn about that child. Most of times we're geared to correcting the behavior without thinking about where that behavior came from.
Yeah. So when thinking about our corrective measures, we are hoping to build in strategies that represent how the brain is organized. And so if you think about the brain being developed neurosequentially, we want our remediation or our interventions to be neurosequential. We want to begin by calming the lowest levels of the brain, those sensory areas, and focusing on regulation. then get to a place where we can relate, talk about, process the information, and help the child use words to process their experience. And then at the very top, that's where reasoning and problem solving comes in, and our restorative or corrective measures. How can we repair and make this better?
And so that becomes really important because we again try to process, why did you do that? Why did you hit him? All these other questions, and they haven't even done the first part. And so remember, even we talked with the brain game, we did the tactile. This cross-lateral stimulation also creates calmness. So I want you to repeat after me. Now slow it down. Now turn it into a butterfly. Now let the butterfly land on your shoulder. Come over to your other shoulder. And now let it land right here on your chest. And now just feel those butterfly wings tapping on each part of your chest. This action right here, this cross-lateral stimulation, again, begins to calm down that polyvagal nerve. And so the child just thinks they're playing and repeating after you, but you've already begun the process of settling their nervous system so that they can begin to have a conversation with you.
Well, we didn't say this, but the polyvagal nerve sits probably right under the diaphragm, and when you do that diaphragmatic deep breathing, you are engaging the polyvagal nerve. That is the one nerve in the body that touches every living system, every organ system. So you're sending oxygenated blood throughout the body, and it calms. It's known to calm and regulate the organs and the brain. That is the most healing breath that you can take. In 2019, the state of Delaware provided the Headspace app to all of our educators. 12 minutes a day is all that's required to build a practice that will improve your blood pressure as well as your A1C for diabetes. We want to build healthier adults so that they can co-regulate and model the social and emotional competence that young people need.
Speaking of co-regulation, we have what are referred to as mirror neurons in our bodies, and they are what make going to the movies make you cry. When that story gets sad on the stage, on the screen, the next thing you know, you feel those tears dripping down your face. Or when they get shocked, you get shocked, because our brains are literally trained to help understand someone else, because you begin to mirror what they are doing, and you begin to understand what they are doing. So when we're interacting with children, and when children are interacting with each other, they are also feeding off of that mirroring. My niece did something, and she kind of ticked my mom off. And then she's at the age where she still doesn't understand that angry doesn't mean I don't love you. So she's like, I think you're angry. I think you don't love me. And I said, well, why do you say that? Because she's angry with me. And so we keep going back and forth. And like Teri said, when she says, you're angry with me, my mom, what do you think my mom says? I'm not angry. So she really is telling this child that what she perceives is not correct. But the child is right, because grandmom is feeling a little funny right now. So what I want you to do is turn and face someone. And if you need to do 3 people, you can do 3 people. And we're going to do a brief mirroring exercise. And so decide which of you is going to go first. And then the other 2, if you're groups of 3, the other 2 can follow. And so remember, Teri, can you help me? If we're a mirror and I raise this hand, what hand is going up? That hand. So it also helps you to begin to help students align. So you're not going to raise that hand, even though that is her right hand, you're gonna raise just like you're looking in a mirror, okay? So I'm gonna give you a few moments. Don't try to make them do the TikTok dance. Just do a couple of basic movements. And first person, take your turn. You're just gonna do a couple basic movements. And so if it's a group of 3, both people, you can follow her too. You can be in the mirror with her too. Awesome. So you probably notice you have to really tune in to the other person to follow their movements, right? You have to become connected. So the next person to take their turn, instead of doing movements alone, I want you to do emotional facial expressions and have your person in the mirror to mirror your facial expressions. And go. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. I don't know if you could hear all of that giggling going on over your own giggling or not. But it brought immediate joy into the room. But it also reminds you that you don't want to be unauthentic when you're dealing with children, but you need to recognize that if they're in tune, they recognize those changes in your facial inflections. And they are interpreting your emotion, and they are potentially interpreting what that emotion feels like coming from other places. So if when mommy frowns, it means it's going to be a bad night, what happens when teacher frowns? Yeah. It's triggered me to think it's going to be a bad day, and now I'm going to act accordingly, which is likely to turn it into a bad day. Yeah.
That's great, Kim. Now, she has done an amazing job of moving us along. And so what I want to say now is experiences build the brain. Is those serve and return relationships that you all just had. When the baby does something, the adult does something, that back and forth communication is when the synapses are firing the fastest and the most furiously. Bruce Perry says that we need strong attachments, self-regulation, affiliation and attunement, and tolerance that moves into respect. Those are the 6 core concepts for healthy child development, okay? Sure, and we'll make sure the slides go out, but it's in the slides. So it begins with attachment, self-regulation, affiliation, okay, getting to know other people and getting connected with them. But attunement is me tuning into your temperature, okay, and us moving in concert together. That's what you just did in your mirror activity. Those things support tolerance and ultimately respect. And so when we have healthy serve and return, we're building trust. There was a time with, my daughter is 31, when they did the count earlier, who has a child this age? They didn't get to my child's age. I was like, it's other kids. My daughter is 31, but when she was born, you know, in the early 90s, we were still telling people you don't have to pick kids up every time they cry. We know now that that's not true. Go to them every time they cry. We want to build trust. You cannot spoil, you can't spoil a baby by picking them up. We want them to trust that we're going to come and we're going to be there to support. And the funny thing about this, I'll tell you all a secret. I'm looking around the room to see if anybody's here who's going to go back and tell this. But I did a legislative presentation a few years ago, and someone, one of the people that we vote for, asked, are we helping kids too much? And I tell you, my heart sank, because I had to think about, I don't think I've ever had too much help in my life. That when people get what they need, you feel great about it and you move on. You don't linger there and say, oh, keep helping me. No, kids, they gain mastery and they move on to the next skill. That's what thriving is. We want to create opportunities for young people to do that, but it begins with trust, then competence. When that mastery comes, they take off. All right. So now, just like you can have healthy serve and return can get disrupted. It gets disrupted by, depression, mental illness. It gets disrupted by economic challenges and not having enough food in the house, or parents working overtime sometimes. All of these things can disrupt serve and return. And so as much as possible, we want to be that community, help families, wrap arms around new parents so that we are able to fill in those gaps when things take place in the family. I'm gonna look at our time. We talked about emotion matching, but I want to say a few more things about this. Kim mentioned the importance of mirroring. In our schools, we're asking our adults to be thermostats. We want them to set the tone for what takes place in the school, okay? When doing that, that emotion matching is so necessary because there's research that says that when you're in a classroom with an anxious teacher, kids are more anxious, okay? They're matching the emotional tone in that room. We can confirm that in research by testing the cortisol levels in their saliva, okay? So with that science, we're trying to take those best practices and apply that information to what takes place in our classrooms. So some of the things that we have learned include that when young people, for example, experience fight, flight, or freeze, as we talked about before, we can match interventions that mimic that behavior so that they get that need satisfied and can quickly get back online so that they are able to regulate, be productive, and get back into learning. So when experiencing the fight impulse, pushing and deep pressure is a great intervention. For flight, jumping on a trampoline, taking a walk, going for a run. When students are in freeze, particularly our secondary students, our older students, a lot of times we're misinterpreting freeze for a lack of motivation. We're giving it a negative name, but they're really dissociating in a sense. And so what we want to do is get them back grounded in their bodies. That's where our breath work comes in, even rocking in a rocking chair. And if you go into our schools, you should see these interventions at work. So please look for them. We can build in a stronger attach impulse by interacting with young people and getting to know them, just simply sitting two minutes a day over a 10-day period. We call it a 2 by 10. It's a great way to build a relationship but form those strong attachments, because ultimately we want trust-based relationships, because that's where we heal. And then lastly, just a reminder that we want to build those relationships in that neurosequential way. So starting by getting young people regulated, going back into relationship, and then into reasoning. And we move fluidly out of that. If you think about even your relationships throughout the evening, keep that sequence in mind. Regulate, relate, reason.
So why don't we relate a little bit right here? Let's have, this is real improvisational on my part, so I hope it's gonna work. Let's have these first two tables here. You're gonna go on the table. Give me a little space, yep. Okay, so you're gonna go, give a beat between it. So 1, 2, 3. These two tables here. You're going to go on that too. These three tables, like these four tables on this side. Woo! Woo! Keep it going. Everybody in the back? Uh-huh. 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 I can't hear my uh-huh. Okay, that's better. Let me hear you some more. Awesome. Let's bring it down. Give yourselves a hand.
All right. So very quickly, we often talk about the brain as if there's only one way to soothe it or energize it. And the reality is there are lots of ways. And so you'll find in the handouts that we have strategies for calming and soothing. Those are designed to get rid of congested thoughts, help you consolidate your memories, but bring back creativity, because we learn and are productive when we're in that sort of a calm alertness. And some of those activities are mindfulness and deep breathing, but you could also do journaling, cooking. The idea is to find out what truly regulates you, and all of us regulate differently. Singing, I've noticed lately that humming has been really important to me during the pandemic, and I find myself sometimes rocking and swaying, and that too is a great way to calm and soothe the brain. When we think about a hypo-aroused amygdala, you want to energize or pump up the brain. And in those cases, some of the activities that you might use will promote body safety, they'll increase your productivity, and then replenish your attention. And they could be standing, rocking, a tug of war, bouncing on a fitness ball. How many of you are using flexible seating in your office spaces? Yes. Tapping on the body, karate, boxing, drumming, and the tapping that we just did on the table. All great ways to energize. I even notice sometimes kids sort of bouncing their legs. You'll see young people doing things with their physical bodies, tapping a pencil. Looking back, I realize now a lot of those things are ways that they are energizing or maintaining their regulation. And so, in our classrooms, sometimes it's nice to help people get an alternative way of thinking about or processing what they're seeing. When someone is tapping, it may be annoying the adult, but it is not meant to annoy or bother or interrupt. We want to help them find another way to regulate themselves. And so simply putting felt on the table absorbs the sound of that tapping. And so, just giving you some different ways to think about what could be an intervention.
We have about 10 minutes. I don't know if you want to open it up to any questions. Sure.
All right.
Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. We have more time. So we can go play if you want. We're talking out loud to each other as facilitators. It's a well-known strategy.
It actually is, though, Kim. We're processing, and that's a good thing. You should be processing all the time. And what we do have, we are going to take some time for questions, but I want to stop there for a sec. Does anybody, do you have any thoughts about what you've heard so far? Anything that you might be interested in knowing more about, or you might want to try? Yes. Thank you for saying that. Let me tell you something. You will find the more regulated you are, the more regulated the people around you will be, okay? You're sharing your regulation with them. And it's hard to learn this stuff without sharing it with other people. Not diagnosing, but sharing, right? The intent of play is to notice, reflect, kind of give meaning or value to the activities that you see. This is a way to help people process and get meaning out of what they're doing. The things that they're doing may not necessarily feel adaptive, but we get a chance to support them in building those adaptive opportunities or coping skills as replacement behaviors through play. Yes.
It's a very interesting point, and how much you can or cannot communicate with just your eyes. You know, how is that impacting the vibe and the energy that we're picking up from other people because we're missing the rest of that facial response, you know, which then sends us to potentially body language more. You know, like what are we picking up from people's body language because we're not able to see all of their face.
Thank you.
We can go play. Okay. All right. So the only thing you need is you, and you're going to come right into this room over here.